The Man on the Moon, the legend of Scott Mescudi. Welcome to Six Notes or Separation. If you're new to the podcast, here's how it's going to work. Every episode, I dive into a musician, exploring their lives, their music, and any scandals they might have got themselves twisted in. But to keep things fun and interesting for you, and to keep you all on your toes, maybe add a little bit of spice, if you will, I've put my own twist on things. Oh, yes, I have. Just like 6 degrees of separation. Every episode has to be linked to the previous and succeeding artist in some way. This could be through a musician the two have in common. This could be through a collaboration, a producer, the same label, a relationship history. Truly anything goes as long as there's a link. So it's been a little while since the last episode. I have been on holiday. I have been to a couple concerts. I've taken some time to recenter. So the last episode was Lil Nas X for anyone who missed it. And without further ado, I'm going to be jumping into the life of a musician who broke down what it meant to be a rap artist in the 2010s. He's a visionary and innovator who took rap to a place which, dare I say, had never gone before. He's responsible for inspiring a new generation of talent and has led his life with such reflection and grace that it's hard not to love and respect everything he does. Of course, I'm going to be jumping into the life of Kid Cudi. But before we go back to where it all started for Kid Cudi, it's time to reveal the link between this week's and last week's Lil Nas X. Now, it's pretty clear that these two rappers have a very strong friendship with 2 collaborations under their belt, and they've also vocalized their respect for one another. Not only did they officially release their song Stars in the Sky for Sonic the Hedgehog 2 in 2022, but Nas also teased an unreleased collab they did titled Company. He leaked the song on an Instagram Live, but for whatever reason, it hasn't quite reached the light of day. I think that one's probably just going to be ended up being discarded. However, what brings these two artists together the most is perhaps the duo Take a Day Trip. Now, Take a Day Trip is the dream team, if you will, comprised of Denzel Baptiste and David Byrell. The two have sort of been credited with launching Lil Nas's career due to their production credits on Old Town Road and Nas's first projects, Seven and Montero. The same producers are also listed on Kid Cudi's highly anticipated 2020 album, The Man on the Moon 3, The Chosen, as well as being the driving force behind the Scotts, the duo formed of Kid Cudi and that of Travis Scott. The friendship didn't end there though, when Nas was facing a lot of criticism from Christians in 2023, as I mentioned in last episode, for all of the satanic imagery used in his vigils. Kid Cudi was quick to bash down one of the diss tracks made about him. He actually even went as far as showing support for the bravery of Nas and making the rap and hip hop scene a more LGBTQ+ friendly space. And I guess this boundary breaking approach Nas nonchalantly brought to the industry is another thing he has in common with Kid Cudi. For Kid Cudi is really quite the innovator, as I mentioned in the intro. Born in Ohio in 1984, Kid Cudi was the child known as Scott Mescudi. He was the youngest of 4, his mother being a choir teacher for a high school, which is probably likely his first introduction to music, whilst his father was a World War II veteran who doubled up as a house painter and a substitute teacher. But grief hit the Mescudi family very early on, with Scott's father dying from cancer when he was only 11 years old. From that point onwards, the world really changed for Mescudi. His behaviour became a lot more violent. I think he racked up a juvenile police record. He became a lot harder to teach. He was expelled from many schools. He just became a very angry and maybe a hateful child. So yeah, as I mentioned, Scott's behaviour became a lot harder to manage for schools. He threatened to punch his school principal, I think, and he actually just ended up giving up on academics completely after he saw the rise of Hot Boys. Now, Hot Boys is a group of 4 rappers, which is where Lil Wayne came from. Like, Lil Wayne became the massive solo artist rapper we now know him as because he came from this group, and this group blew up, I think, when Lil Wayne was around like 14, 15 years old, or maybe 16. And this was a very similar age to Kid Cudi. This was a very similar age to Scott. Scott was about 15 at this time. So I guess Lil Wayne really acted as Scott's first inspiration. He saw a future filled with hope through Lil Wayne. And so, you know, the juvenile record and the disregard of school was very much seen as minor issues. Scott Mescudi did actually end up going to uni to study film, but he dropped out after a year to join the Navy. However, because of this police record from his youth, his plans very much fell through because you can't obviously join the Navy with a record. So Scott thought he'd try a crack at music. He'd experimented with music before, beginning rapping at the age of 19. And 2 years later, he moved in with his uncle in New York City with nothing but a demo and $500 to his name. A very bold move, but honestly, as you can see from his youth, his childhood, he really had nothing to lose. Like any hustler, Scott worked at clothing stores to earn some money, saving up enough to move into an apartment with his friend Oladipo Omashaw, better known as the producer and his long-term collaborator, Dr. Genius. In 2006, however, something short of a miracle came Cudi's way when he bumped into the trailblazing and breakthrough artist Kanye West. Oh yes, you heard me right. Kid Cudi and Kanye West. This was the beginning of it all, guys. He bumped into Kanye while shopping at a Virgin Megastore. If you're not familiar with that kind of store, my understanding is that it's the American version of HMV, which we have in the UK. HMV basically is a shop that specializes in records, films, TV and games. Like, it's just a big media store, if you will. The run-in story goes a little like this. Scott was browsing through some CDs when he saw a Jesus piece from the corner of his eye. Now, a Jesus piece, didn't know what this was, but it's almost like a stamp for hip-hop culture and in hip-hop culture. It's a piece of jewelry featuring Jesus' face with a crown of thorns, and musicians often decorate them with jewels and stones, etc. to accessorize their outfits. You know, people like the Notorious B.I.G., Kendrick Lamar and Kanye all wore them, amongst many, many others in the hip-hop industry. So you can imagine that when Scott Mescudi saw a gleaming piece of gold from the corner of his eye, he was met with an adrenaline rush of excitement as he looked up to see the familiar face of Kanye West. And you have to give it to Mescudi for what he does next. He strolled up to Kanye very politely, introduced himself and offered the artist to listen to his music. Nothing else really came of that interaction, but that wasn't the first or last time Kanye saw Mescudi's face. Oh no, when working in Bape the clothing store, Scott was working behind the tills, putting through Kanye's order when he had to chase the musician down the street because he forgot to remove one of the security tags on Kanye's brand new jacket. Slightly embarrassing for Mescudi, but also another opportunity to get his face remembered to West. Whether the musician recognised him or not has not been answered, but Kanye certainly would have had cogs click into place when his manager showed him the same kid's music just a year later. In 2007, Scott released what would become one of his biggest songs to date, Day and Night. Everyone will know this. You might not know anything about Kid Cudi, guys, but you will know his music. That is one thing I didn't know when jumping into this research, but you'll know his stuff. He released Day and Night to MySpace, attracting many, many music blogs, and in due course, Plain Pat, Kanye's manager at the time. A year after that, Scott was signed to Kanye's label, Good Music. I've talked about this more in my episode on Kanye, but Good Music was really a breathing ground, if that's the right word. It was really a ground for musicians to come up and have the most successful careers. So many talented musicians have come from Good Music, and Kid Cudi is one of them. It was also around this time, so he's landed his first record deal. So it was also around this time when Scott Mescudi trial and errored a few different names. He initially started with the name Lil Scott, taking inspiration from his childhood icon Lil Wayne. But then he transitioned to Kid Mesk. However, that was quickly thrown out the window when people mistook it for Kid Mess. He then went to Kid Mescudi and then finally settled with Kid Cudi, which I think we can all agree was the best option. In July of 2008, Kid Cudi had his breakthrough success with the release of his first mixtape, A Kid Named Cudi. It was executive produced by Plain Pat and Emil Haney, the latter who started off working for Eminem and his proteges. So you not only have Kanye's manager working on your album, but you also have an Eminem protege. It's a pretty good dream team for your first mixtape. And it really consisted of samples and interpolations which Kid Cudi rapped over, which I feel like is kind of why it maybe was as successful as it was. Anyone that kind of samples a song or interpolates songs, the songs are generally going to be hits because it's already a familiar sound you're using. It's already a likable song that people recognize. So the fact that you've added your own twist with a rap on top, it's kind of likely it's going to do well. But what Kid Cudi brought to the table and what set him apart from so many of his peers was his ability to mix melody into rap. From the get-go, he was able to fuse rap with a more indie rock electronic sound, and that was really fresh at the time. Like, I know we see it quite a bit now with The Weeknd. Honestly, I don't really know anything about hip-hop or rap. You know, I dabble. But I would say The Weeknd is really a staple of this sound now. But this, like, he derived that sound from Kid Cudi. Like, Kid Cudi was really the first to do it, I would say. and Kanye, to be honest. I'd feel like they were really the benchmarks for the boundaries broken in hip hop. Anyway, off the back of this success, Kanye West called upon his new protege to help his friend Jay-Z, oh yes, just Jay-Z, write hooks and choruses for his upcoming album, The Blueprint 3. Kanye also used him for his own album, 808s and Heartbreaks, released in 2008, and ultimately became one of good music's go-to and high-in-demand songwriters. So it's pretty mad that within his first year of being at Good Music, he not only writes and features on Kanye and Jay-Z's albums, two of arguably the biggest names in the hip-hop rap scene. He's also released his own stuff, which is massively critically acclaimed. He's Kanye's second-hand man with all things songwriting and production. That's not an easy feat to achieve. Like, he's clearly very, very talented. So, in January of 2009 came Kid Cudi's highly anticipated debut album, Man on the Moon, The End of the Day. The album debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200 charts and included his hit song Day and Night. What saw this concept album harvest even more attention was the lyrics that just delved into the complexities and I guess the vulnerabilities of Cudi's life. He gave a really surprisingly honest insight into his mind and covered very dark topics, which, if you think about it, was a bit of a taboo back then. You know, he touched upon things such as his suicide attempt in his music and his mental health and his depression. And even though these things are covered a lot more in music now, and I guess that's the music I've grown up with, back in 2009, it wasn't talked about so much, and it was really not talked about at all in the hip hop scenes. The default or the stereotype for rappers is that they rap about machismo and having money and cars and women. Man on the Moon turned away from all of that. It gave people something real in the rap industry. And I listened to this album and I listened to his music and I was just blown away by the production. Like, even though I've grown up in a post Kid Cudi world, I've grown up with rappers who have taken influence from him. What I found super interesting was he still sounded so fresh. Like, Kid Cudi sounded so fresh to me. It sounded so different and so unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Now, because 2009 has really been labelled as Scott Mescudi's year, I'll quickly do a recap for you. He'd already been signed to Kanye's label and had worked on both Kanye's and Jay-Z's albums. He toured with Kanye and Lady Gaga randomly as a support act, released his own breakthrough and commercially successful debut album, and off the back of that went on to feature on Snoop Dogg's MTV show Dog After Dark. So he's clearly getting quite a lot of recognition within the industry. In June of that year, he made a cameo appearance in a music video for the Black Eyed Peas' very nostalgic bop, I Got a Feeling, which is kind of mad because I've listened to this song all my life. Little did I know there was a Kid Cudi link in there. But it was in this music video where he met David Guetta, the DJ that really probably soundtracked him, and Calvin Harris really soundtracks 2010s pop. If the public didn't know Kid Cudi before from The Pursuit of Happiness or Day and Night, they would now after the club banger that was his and David Guetta's song Memories. Again, you might not know what I'm talking about, but you'll play it and you'll know it. His profile was further boosted when he was featured in Black entertainment television show Rising Icons. Each episode would follow the journey of a different rising musician, documenting their life both on tour and at home, and Scott was lucky enough to be one of those rising icons. He also went on to co-headline 50 Cent's festival. So yeah, 2009 was Scott Mescudi's year. I mean, look at all those achievements. It's insane that after hustling in the industry and working at clothing stores, only 2 years from doing sales jobs, he was working with the biggest names in the rap and hip hop scenes. But at some point, all the fun and games, all the money and fame, would have to catch up with him. And this we first got a glimpse of towards the end of his monumental year in 2009. In December, Cudi made headlines for punching a fan in the crowd who randomly threw a wallet on stage during his show in Vancouver. The fan, Michael Sharp, spoke about this to some media outlets, explaining what had happened. At some point in the show, a crowd member threw their wallet on stage. Cudi obviously was prompted to ask whose wallet it was, and obviously everyone at Barricade put their hand up, like who wasn't going to try and claim a free wallet. Cudi ended up giving it to this guy called Michael Sharp, this random fan in the audience, and Cudi said to Sharp if it wasn't his, he'd go and bang him up, basically. He said, if it's not yours, I'm going to come get you. And after a couple of minutes, the guilt of taking a wallet that wasn't his really caught up to Michael, so Michael throws it back on stage, at which point Cudi, I guess, is a man of his word and punches Sharp in the face. Was it probably the best thing to do? No. But, there was kind of like a logical-ish story behind it. Michael spoke to TMZ saying Cudi got in contact and phoned him afterwards, blaming his aggression on his alcohol consumption. And Sharp also said Cudi invited to fly him out to New York, all expenses paid, to watch a show and stay for a weekend. So maybe you can see this as trying to buy him off. Maybe Kid Cudi genuinely did feel bad. Who really knows? However, in 2010, more headlines followed. He was arrested in June for criminal mischief and possession of controlled substances after he smashed a woman's phone and took her door off its hinges. Yeah, I know what you're thinking now. Like, that's not really excusable, and I think I'd have to agree with you. The police found a glass bottle on him when he was searched, which was thought to contain liquid cocaine. And he ended up pleading guilty to the possession of cocaine and had to do 2 days of community service, which is a pretty meager sentence, to be honest. The charges around the vandalism and drug possession were ruled to be dropped if he stayed out of trouble for 6 months, which presumably he did. But there doesn't seem like, what has a big question mark around the story is, unless my research has just failed me, like there doesn't seem to be any more information on who the woman was, why he was tearing down her door, and what the aggression or argument was about. But I'm very glad to say that that was the last time Kid Cudi got involved with the police, which is more than you can say for some other rappers. Also in 2010, you saw the birth of Kid Cudi's daughter, which led to many rumours about a custody battle in 2012. The rumours believe that Mescudi gave up custody over his daughter after his partner, Jamie Baratta, accused him of being an absent father, as well as an unfit father due to his poor mental health from substance abuse. She also allegedly accused him of having violent tendencies, which obviously is kind of backed by the whole tearing down a woman's door scenario. These rumours were disputed by Cudi and his lawyers, who said Cudi did not give up custody over his daughter. And eventually an amicable agreement was reached with Baratta instead. The battle ultimately resulted in Baratta having full custody over their child, but Mescudi was granted visitation rights. He even took a voluntary drug test, which came back clear to prove that he was trying to get himself together and trying to get back on track to be a good father. And he bought a house in Chicago to be close to his daughter and grow up with her. So yeah, although the media might have tried to fuel this relationship breakdown into something nasty and full of animosity, it seems that the situation ended up being dealt with in a pretty civilized way, or at least that's how Cudi's team portrayed it. Anyway, towards the end of 2010, Kid Cudi dropped his second album, Man on the Moon 2, The Legend of Mr. Rager, which debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200 charts. Again, this album provided a very honest look into Cudi's life. The character Mr. Rager sort of acted as his darker alter ego, a bit like Eminem's Slim Shady. That's the kind of vibe we're going for here. Mr. Rager acted as this darker alter ego that was plagued by a coke and alcohol addiction. And as I kind of have alluded to with mentioning the honest and vulnerable lyrics in Scott's music, in January of 2013, Kid Cudi first talked about his struggles with addiction outside of addressing it in music by revealing in an interview that he stopped smoking weed in 2011 after having his daughter. He said that he hated being associated with stoner culture and wanted to be a good role model for her. He also talked about being addicted to antidepressants, which were given to him after an emotional breakdown resulting from a breakup of a relationship. I mean, presumably, if we're connecting the dots, this relationship was probably that of his and Jamie Baratta's, but, you know, that hasn't been explicitly revealed, so I'm not going to jump to conclusions with that one. But he also suffered, as mentioned, from a pretty heavy alcohol and cocaine addiction, which, you know, isn't uncommon in the music industry. I'd say only in the past 10 years have things truly started to change in terms of musicians seeking therapy and being able to take time off tour to focus on their mental health. But back in the 20-teens, again, this was very abnormal to talk about and it wasn't ever addressed. Musicians would just use addiction to power through. So although things seemingly improved after this change in 2011 to 2012, Cudi did find himself having to make a referral to a rehab clinic after he fell back into a cocaine addiction in 2016. In 2022, he spoke about all of this and also elaborated on the suicidal ideation first mentioned in his music, saying that he suffered with thoughts of wanting to kill himself for 5 years, another reason why he knew he needed to go to rehab and get some therapy. And I think that really says a lot about the struggles Scott was putting himself through. You know, he had probably not even dealt with the grief of losing his father at 11 years old properly, like probably never went to therapy for that and really worked through it. If you think about it, he jumped straight into being violent and straight into dropping out of school and then moving to New York and then got distracted with music and then got caught up in the rap and hip hop culture. And then along that way, he kind of had this grief he hadn't dealt with. Then he got into substance abuse and he had this suicidality. And all the time he was shutting down all his emotions with alcohol and cocaine. So as much as going cold turkey with the substance abuse might have dealt with the addiction for a small amount of time, he still had all these feelings. He still had all this suicidality and he still had all this grief, which must have completely gnawed away at him until he fell back into an addiction. So it must have been a lot to put his career on pause and to actually take that time to be better and get better and really seek the help he'd been needing since he was 11 years old. And something really, really interesting that Kid Cudi has also spoken about was, alongside all of this mental health and addiction side of it, he also felt immense guilt about his fame. He felt really shameful of having it because, you know, looking at his childhood, we know that Scott grew up in a pretty financially tight household. His friends all in similar boats to him, trying to make ends meet. So when he shot to fame and raked in all this money at the age of 25, if that, he felt like he couldn't properly enjoy his success because he knew his family was still out there struggling. He knew his friends were still out there struggling, and he knew that they were great people. And not that he wasn't a great person, but he knew that they were just as deserving of the success money as he was. And he really struggled with accepting that and not feeling bad about that. You know, the more I read about this man, the more I adore him. I really love doing my research for Kid Cudi because he just feels so real and he feels so honest. And I think, you know, again, I'm going to make a disclaimer and say I don't know loads about the hip hop and rap scene, but I think what's interesting about rappers, maybe it's changed now since Kid Cudi's kind of blown up, but before Kid Cudi's time, it seems that if rappers did talk about their mental health, they talked about it through their music. You know, they'd talk about it in lyrics and make references to it in lyrics, or verses. But what Kid Cudi did that was so different is he'd talk about in interviews. You know, in 2014, he went on the Arsenio Hall show, I believe, and talked about how hip hop needs to change and it needs to be more honest. He was like, for him, the whole point of music and the whole aim of music is to speak to the kids that are lonely and is to make at least one person feel a little bit more seen and a little bit more heard. And I just think that's so rare in hip hop and rap, where a lot of songs are about fame and money and just getting girls. You know, I know that's like a stereotype and generic, but I do think that Kid Cudi was a real change for the industry in that way. And I think, like, just to conclude on this little point, for me, I feel like I get a real understanding of who Scott Mescudi is through his music. You know, I get a real understanding of who the 11-year-old Scott Mescudi who lost his father is. Whereas I think it could have been so easy for him to portray himself as Kid Cudi, this rapper with everything. Anyway, back to Scott's career. In 2013, or like around 2012, Kid Cudi decided to part ways with Good Music, focusing on his own label and his own music, which didn't need to be influenced by Kanye or his team. But weirdly enough, that wasn't actually what ruined his and Kanye's relationship. The two had a falling out in 2016 when Cudi took to Twitter. Now, this admittedly Cudi probably shouldn't have done, but he took to Twitter to rant about artists, name-dropping Drake and Kanye specifically, who'd find talented musicians and keep them close out of fear of the musician's solo career becoming a threat. He went on to say that a lot of the artists everyone was obsessed with had an extensive list of writers and producers behind them, and whilst he'd been loyal to his peers and mentors, they hadn't necessarily been loyal back to him. A bit of a stinging tweet. He's basically saying, I'm very talented. My talent was subdued by Kanye because he knew I was a threat because of how good I was. And now I'm getting no recognition, and all these artists who have come after me who are now getting recognition are only famous because they have all these other big names backing them. So, you know, not great. Kanye addressed the tweet. Like, I love it for Kid Cudi for doing that, but maybe not fantastic for name dropping specific artists such as Kanye and Drake. Kanye addressed the tweet on stage at a show, saying Cudi shouldn't have disrespected him like that, but the two seemed to resolve their issues by 2018, forming their own music duo called Kids See Ghosts. The final straw on the camel's back, however, came for this friendship in 2022 when Kanye said Kid Cudi wouldn't feature on his album Donda 2 since he was friends with Pete Davidson, famously one of Kim Kardashian's partners. Cudi concluded that despite still having love for Kanye, he just can't get behind them being friends anymore, and so that was really that. In terms of any other career highlights, I'm going to speed through for you. In 2020, Kid Cudi and Travis Scott formed the duo The Scotts, as I mentioned in the intro, and they actually released their first single together, which was Kid Cudi's only #1 single. Pretty mad. In the same year, Cudi announced his production and music management company, Mad Solar. He also released a very successful comic book series and launched his own clothing company, Motor, in 2022. He's also revealed in an episode of Hot Ones that his chapter as Kid Cudi is coming to a close, looking to move away from music and pursue his other ventures instead. You know, perhaps this could come with the fact that his music isn't charting incredibly well, but he actually has a new album coming out in a couple months, so Kid Cudi isn't put to bed just yet. So that really brings you up to date with where Kid Cudi is at now, but I think I'd be doing you all a very big disservice if I didn't mention what Kid Cudi's role in the Diddy trial was. Like, you might have heard his name crop up in the media again because of the very famous Diddy Do It trial. Scott Mescudi and Cassie Ventura, Diddy's ex-girlfriend, were in a brief relationship in 2011 when she and Diddy were on a break. In December, Kid Cudi alleged that Diddy had broken into his home and locked his dog in the bathroom after learning about his and Cassie's relationship. Obviously, Diddy is denying all of this, as he has with pretty much every single allegation anyway. In 2012, things escalated even more when Cudi described receiving a call from his dog sitter about his car being on fire, and later found out that the top of his Porsche had been cut into for a Molotov cocktail to be placed. A Molotov cocktail is basically when bottles of alcohol are stuffed with a cloth and set alight so that it creates basically like a bomb effect, if you know what I mean, like a big fire explosion moment. Even though there's no hardcore evidence to suggest either of these events were in fact carried out by Diddy, what was a little bit suspicious is that in 2015, Mescudi recalled that Diddy later apologised to him for all the bullshit that had happened in the past, making him look a little guilty because, you know, why would Diddy be saying sorry and be apologising for all the bullshit, you know, if he didn't have something to apologise for? And also if he wasn't alluding to the bullshit being the fact that it was a fire set in his car and breaking into his house. Anyway, off the back of this, many rappers have decided to get involved, calling Kid Cudi a snitch and a snake, which again just makes Diddy look more and more suspicious. It's like, why are these rappers calling him a snake if they had nothing to snake him out on? Do you know what I mean? Anyway, if you ask me, this just goes to show the kind of person Kid Cudi is. He doesn't care if he's called a snitch or a rat, because from day one, he's been breaking down the boundaries of what it means to be a rap artist. From day one, he hasn't fit into the stereotype of having like this code of silence within the hip-hop industry. He's always been a guy of truth. He's always been a guy of vulnerability. He's always been someone of honesty and who wants to be real and transparent, and that shines through in every aspect of his work. So to conclude, if you're not convinced about Kid Cudi being a pioneer in rap music, let's have a look at all the boundaries he's broken down. Not only has he bridged the gap between rap and indie rock, using melodies to break up the flow we usually hear from rappers, but he's also performed in crop tops and dresses, sung and spoken about topics which were seen as taboo, shown support for artists similarly alienated for being different, as well as speaking out against those who use their power to dominate. He's influenced a new wave of talent such as Kendrick Lamar, Tyler the Creator, The Weeknd, Drake and Travis Scott. And although on paper he may have less accolades and success than his contemporaries just mentioned, it is clear that Kid Cudi is a generational artist who's paved the way for all those who came after him. By being vulnerable and keeping Scott Mescudi's truth at the centre of his work, Kid Cudi has been able to achieve something far more valuable than what any accolade could have ever given him. He's found his longevity through the way his music personally connects with and makes so many around the world feel seen. And that's all there is to him, guys. He's got a new album on the way. I can't remember when it's coming out, but he's releasing singles for it, so give it a couple months, give it a listen, and perhaps you'll see what he's all about. Thank you all so much for listening. If you'd like to keep up to date with all things Six Notes or Separation, or if you want to be a future fan on the show, make sure to contact us and check out our socials at Six Notes Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Anywho, I'll be back with another episode on another artist where we'll be exploring the link between them and Kid Cudi.